My name is Harper. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a senior accountant for a supply chain company in Charlotte, North Carolina. The morning my sister called to tell me I was no longer welcome at her wedding, I was eating oatmeal at my kitchen counter and answering emails before 7 a.m. She said, "You've been nothing but negative since we started planning. We don't want that energy there. Stay home." I said I understood, hung up, and drove to work. 41 hours later, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. My Visa had just been charged $18,400 by a wedding venue in Charleston, South Carolina. None of that money was mine to give. I pulled into a parking structure, sat in my car, and stared at the notification for approximately 10 seconds. Then I opened the app, marked the transaction unauthorized, and locked the card. The call center put me on hold for 6 minutes. When a representative picked up, I had already written down the vendor name, the timestamp, and the amount. The account was frozen within the hour. By noon, I had 43 missed calls from my mother, my sister, and my soon-to-be brother-in-law. I didn't answer any of them. Because there was one thing I already knew: this hadn't been an accident, and someone had left a trail. 6 months before the charge appeared, my sister announced her engagement at a Sunday family dinner in my mother's house outside Greensboro. She and Weston had been together for 4 years, and the proposal had happened during a trip to Portugal that my mother had already posted about before my sister could announce it herself. Everyone cried. My mother immediately opened her laptop and began pulling up venues. My sister wanted Charleston. She'd always wanted Charleston. The Spanish moss, the pastel houses, the waterfront ceremony photographs she'd been collecting on her phone since she was 19. The wedding she described would have 200 guests, a live band, and a catered dinner that started at 6 and ended whenever the night ran out. It would be the kind of wedding that launched 1,000 comments under every photograph. My mother called it a celebration of a new beginning. Weston said whatever made my sister happy. I said I was glad for them both, and I meant it. The conversation about money started 3 weeks later. My mother called me on a Wednesday evening and said the venue deposit for their top choice was due, and her credit card was close to its limit after a home repair. She asked whether I could put $4,000 on my card as a placeholder until she could transfer the funds at the end of the month. I asked what the total deposit was. She said $6,100. I asked whether the full amount would come from her account or mine. She said she'd handle the rest. I said I would cover $4,000 on the condition that she transferred it back within 2 weeks and sent written confirmation of the plan. She agreed. She sent the money back in 11 days. I noted that in my phone's notes app, dated and saved. That was the only clean transaction we ever had. Over the following weeks, the wedding budget expanded in the way wedding budgets do when the people controlling them are not responsible for the bill. My mother added a cocktail hour with past appetizers. My sister upgraded the floral arrangements after visiting a vendor at a bridal show. Weston's family requested a premium open bar. The rehearsal dinner, which had been described as a simple family meal at a local restaurant, became a private event at a waterfront venue that required its own catering minimum. Each time a new cost appeared, my mother sent a message framed as a question. "Do you think you might be able to help with the rehearsal dinner deposit? I know it's a lot, but it would mean so much to your sister." Each time I asked for a written breakdown of total costs and a clear picture of who was contributing what. Each time, the breakdown never came. What came instead were phone calls from my sister saying I was making her engagement feel like a business transaction, and from my mother saying that I earned more than most people in our family, and that generosity was supposed to flow from love, not calculations. My mother had always operated this way. Not out of cruelty exactly, but out of a belief that money inside a family was a communal resource that flowed toward whoever needed it most, and that the person with the most reliable income was simply the most convenient source. My sister had absorbed this belief completely. She spent without tracking. She borrowed without a plan to repay. When I had pointed out 3 years earlier that she had never returned $800, I lent her for a car repair. My mother said that keeping a ledger between sisters was the kind of coldness that broke families apart. I had not lent money informally to any family member since that conversation. That boundary held until my mother framed the rehearsal dinner deposit as an emergency involving Weston's elderly grandmother, who had traveled from out of state and needed the event to be held at a specific accessible venue. I agreed to hold a $1,200 deposit on my card, stated clearly, in a text message that I still have, with the direct understanding that the hold would be released as soon as the venue confirmed the booking with Weston's family's card. My sister chose a different rehearsal dinner venue 2 weeks later and told me the original booking had been canceled, no charges applied. I confirmed with the venue and they confirmed no charges had been processed. My card information remained in their system as the contact on the original inquiry. I forgot about it. That was the only mistake I made. The invitation conversation happened 8 weeks before the wedding. My sister had already removed me from the bridesmaid group. She said I had expressed too many concerns about the budget and that her other bridesmaids were uncomfortable with the tension I was creating. But I was still listed as a guest. I had booked a hotel room in Charleston for the weekend and said nothing further about any of it. The morning she called to tell me to stay home, it was 7 days before the ceremony. My mother had spent the previous week describing the event in increasingly elaborate terms to relatives, including a custom floral installation and a surprise fireworks display over the water that Weston's family supposedly funded. I had not responded to any of it. My sister said the call was her idea, but my mother was sitting in the room. She said, "You've been holding everything over our heads for 6 months. Every time someone looks at something beautiful for this wedding, there's this shadow over it because you've made your feelings about the money so clear. We don't want that energy there. You're not in the wedding party anymore anyway. Just stay home." I said, "Okay, I hope it goes beautifully." I canceled my hotel reservation. I got a partial refund. I went back to my oatmeal and my emails, and I thought that was the end of it. 41 hours later, at 6:48 in the morning, the alert came through. Transaction alert. 18400 Magnolia Grove Events, Charleston, SC. Magnolia Grove Events was the wedding venue, not the rehearsal dinner venue, the main wedding venue, where the ceremony and reception were being held. The one where my card had never been used, where I had never set foot, where I had not been involved in any planning capacity since the bridesmaid conversation. Except that the original wedding venue inquiry, the one my mother had asked me to hold with a $4,000 deposit 8 months earlier, had apparently been transferred rather than canceled when the bookings was consolidated. The venue had migrated my card from the initial deposit to the main account. This was not something I had authorized. This was not something I had been told. I sat in my car in the parking structure for 11 minutes before I was calm enough to walk into the building. I locked the card, called the bank, and sent one message to all 3 of them: my sister, my mother, and Weston. My card was charged $1,400 by the venue. I did not authorize this. Contact your bank. By the time I reached my desk, there were 43 missed calls. My first call was to Magnolia Grove Events. I asked to speak with whoever had managed the account. A woman named Claudette, the venue's senior coordinator, called me back within the hour. She was professional and clearly uncomfortable. She explained the sequence. When the wedding booking was finalized, the venue's system pulled the card associated with the original inquiry as the payment method on file. A woman who called in 4 days before the event confirmed the final headcount and approved the balance to be charged to the card already on file. Claudette had assumed it was a routine confirmation and processed the charge. I asked whether the authorization had been given in person or by phone. By phone, she said. I asked whether the calls were recorded. She paused, then said some calls were recorded for training purposes and she would need to check with her manager. I asked her to check, to preserve any records connected to my account, and told her I had already filed a dispute with my bank and intended to file a police report. Claudette called back 40 minutes later. The call had been recorded. The voice authorizing the charge, she said quietly, was a woman who identified herself as my mother, gave the last 4 digits of my card correctly, confirmed my billing address, and said she was acting on behalf of the cardholder. My mother had called the venue, given my account information, and told them she was authorized to approve the charge. I asked Claudette to preserve the recording, the email correspondence, and every record connected to my account. She said she would, and that the venue's insurance counsel would likely need to cooperate with the investigation. That evening, I went through every document connected to the wedding. The $4,000 deposit conversation was in writing. The text about the rehearsal dinner hold was in writing. There was nothing anywhere. Not in email, not in text, not in voicemail, where I had agreed to pay for any portion of the ceremony or reception. What I found instead was something I hadn't noticed before. In an email chain from 7 months ago, when my mother was coordinating the initial venue inquiry, she had CC'd an old email address of mine, an account from a previous employer that I'd kept active but checked only occasionally. When I logged in that evening, I found 14 emails between my mother and Magnolia Grove events that I had never read. She had corresponded with the venue as the primary contact for 6 months, positioning herself as managing the account on my behalf. She had referenced the card we have on file twice in those messages. She had never been corrected, because the venue had no reason to question her. The final email, sent the morning of the recorded phone call, said, "I'll be calling to confirm the final balance today. Please process the full amount to the card on file per our previous discussions." That email had been sent from my mother's personal address, not mine. I called my cousin Opal that night. She's the one person in my extended family who has always been honest with me, even when the truth was inconvenient. When I told her the amount, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She did something like this once to a friend of mine. Not this much, but the same basic idea, using someone else's name to approve a charge she had no authority over." I asked whether her friend had reported it. Opal said she had let it go because it was small and she hadn't wanted the confrontation. Then Opal said, "Harper, this is $18,400. Do not let this go." I filed a police report that evening, describing unauthorized use of a payment account and potential financial impersonation during a transaction. The officer was thorough. She noted that the recorded call would be significant and asked me to preserve everything. My attorney, a woman I had worked with during a contract dispute 2 years earlier, listened to the facts the next morning and said the recorded call alone was substantial. She advised me not to communicate with my mother, my sister, or Weston about the investigation, and to direct all of them to reach her directly if they had questions about the charges. They had a great many questions. My sister left a voicemail saying I had ruined her wedding by disputing the charge, that the bank had flagged the venue's account, and that the ceremony was in chaos 6 days out. She said I had done it on purpose because I was jealous, and always had been. My mother sent a text that said the charge was meant to be a wedding gift, and that I had humiliated the family by treating generosity as a crime. Weston sent 2 messages, more measured than the others, asking me to call him so we could find a solution before the weekend. I sent the same 3 words to all of them: contact my attorney. Her number was below. My mother appeared at my apartment building 2 evenings later. I saw her through the intercom camera before she saw me. Before I touched any door, I started a recording on my phone. I told the front desk I was not available and asked them to document the visit. She stood in the lobby for 11 minutes, spoke to the attendant twice, and left. The attendant wrote down the time and her description. I photographed the log. My mother called my office the following morning, told the receptionist there was a family emergency, and asked to be connected. My manager already knew the situation. I had briefed her that morning, because I was not going to let this blindside my workplace. My manager declined the call, documented it, and forwarded the note to HR. Weston came to my apartment on a Thursday evening. He came alone without my sister, and he texted first to ask if I would open the door. I said yes, and I kept my phone recording before I did. He said he was sorry for how things had gone. He said he hadn't known about the charge until it was disputed. He said my sister had known something involving my card was planned but hadn't asked questions because my mother told her it was being handled and that I had agreed. I asked him directly, had he been told the charge was authorized by me? He said my mother had told him I agreed to contribute to the venue as a wedding gift, and that the amount would come from my card. I asked whether he had asked to see that agreement in writing. He looked at the floor and said no. I asked him whether, at any point, it had seemed strange that I had been told not to attend the wedding and was also supposedly paying for it. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, I think I knew something wasn't right. But your mother was so certain, and it was so close to the date, and I didn't want to create a problem. He wanted me to withdraw the dispute, so the venue would release the funds and the wedding could proceed. I told him I had not authorized the charge and could not withdraw a fraud claim I believed to be accurate. He asked whether I would really let this go to the police over a family disagreement. I told him it was already with the police and had been since Monday. His face changed completely. I told him the entire conversation had been recorded, not to trap him, but because I had learned that documentation was the only thing that held when everything else fell apart. He nodded. He left without asking me again. The wedding did not happen on the planned date. The venue, with a disputed charge pending a fraud investigation, required the balance to be settled through a verified payment before the event could proceed. My sister and Weston scrambled to cover costs in the final days before the ceremony. They were able to pay a reduced portion through Weston's family and a partial credit from a vendor who released his deposit, but the reception was scaled back significantly. The live band was canceled. The florist reduced these installation by half. 60 guests who had been added in the third expansion of the guest list were quietly uninvited. The ceremony happened. I know because Opal attended and sent me one photograph afterward. A small ceremony on the waterfront, my sister in her dress, Weston beside her, my mother in pale blue on the front row. The backdrop was exactly as beautiful as my sister had always imagined. She looked the way people look when they're relieved. Something is finally happening regardless of how. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. Claudette cooperated fully with the investigation. She provided the recorded call, the complete email correspondence, and a time-stamped timeline of every interaction my mother had with the venue, while representing herself as acting on my behalf. The recording was clear. My mother's voice. My card's last 4 digits. My billing address. The words, "I am authorized to approve this payment." The bank provisionally reversed the $18,400 charge within 10 days. The full investigation continued, but the reversal meant my balance was restored while the process moved forward. The police interviewed my mother. They interviewed Claudette. They reviewed the email chain. My mother told investigators that she had understood herself to have permission based on a verbal conversation she and I had had months earlier, in which I had allegedly agreed to contribute a significant amount as a wedding gift. She could not produce written evidence of this. She could not produce a date, a location, or a single witness. She said I had agreed, and then changed my mind and used the legal system to punish her for organizing something beautiful. The prosecutor did not promise speed or guaranteed outcomes. What she told me was that what mattered was the record, and the record was unambiguous. A call from my mother's cell phone number to a venue, authorizing a charge to a card that was not her card, without my knowledge, presented as an action she had the authority to take. Formal charges were filed for unauthorized use of a financial account and fraudulent impersonation during a financial transaction. My mother hired an attorney. My sister issued a statement to our extended family, saying I had weaponized the legal system against our mother over a miscommunication about a gift. I sent one message to the family group chat. I did not authorize the charge. The bank, the venue, and law enforcement have the records. I will not be discussing this further in this forum. Then I left the group. My mother's attorney attempted to negotiate a resolution that described the transaction as arising from unclear family communication. I refused to support any language that implied ambiguity where the record showed none. My attorney communicated that clearly, and the negotiation moved forward without my participation in the framing. The resolution reached several months later required restitution, probation, community service, and a no-contact condition. The written record stated that I had not authorized the payment. My mother signed that document. My sister called me once, after everything was settled, from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I didn't know whose it was. She said she wanted to apologize for not asking more questions. She said she had just known something felt off but hadn't pushed because she hadn't wanted to know the answer. I told her I appreciated that she said it. I also told her that choosing not to ask had been its own kind of participation, and that I wasn't ready to continue the conversation. I said it clearly, not cruelly, and then I ended the call. Weston sent a handwritten card. 3 sentences. He was sorry for asking me to drop the dispute. He should have asked harder questions earlier. He hoped I was okay. I put the card in a drawer and did not respond. Opal and I had dinner every few weeks. She didn't push me toward reconciliation with anyone. She didn't ask whether I planned to eventually forgive my mother, or whether family was supposed to be able to absorb this kind of thing without consequence. She asked about my job, my neighborhood, a true crime podcast she thought I'd like, and we talked about those things instead. That was exactly what I needed. I changed banks. I replaced my card number, froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, and updated every stored payment on every account I had. Subscriptions, travel apps, vendors, all of it. I removed my mother as my emergency contact. I reviewed my credit reports for any accounts opened without my knowledge, and placed fraud alerts regardless of what I found. I updated my apartment locks, not because I believed she had a key, but because doing it felt like closing something properly. I did not remove anyone from my life in anger. I removed people because the evidence, laid out plainly, showed me who they had been willing to be when they thought I wasn't looking. My sister had wondered privately whether the charge could be reversed once I was on a plane to nowhere. My mother had given my account number to a stranger and said she had permission to use it. My brother-in-law had known something was off and had said nothing until a legal process made silence impossible. None of those things were reversible by apology. A locked account is not a punishment. It is a response to a demonstrated behavior. I didn't lock my card to hurt anyone. I locked it because someone had used it without my authorization, and I was not going to allow that to continue. And the people who had benefited from it were not entitled to access simply because they wanted it back. There is a version of this story where I spend years wondering whether I was too harsh, whether family is supposed to absorb this kind of thing, whether the cost of my mother's legal record is something I should carry as my own. I thought about that version. I considered it seriously, sitting with it over several evenings in my quiet apartment with the phone face down on the table. Then I went back to the recording. My mother's voice, calm and practiced, giving my account information to a stranger and saying, "I am authorized to approve this payment." She was not authorized. She knew she was not authorized. The conversation she claimed we'd had never happened. There was nothing to reconcile with that fact. The fact simply was. My sister had said I was bringing negative energy to her wedding and told me to stay home. She said it because I had asked for receipts and requested written agreements and declined to treat my bank account as something that belonged to whoever in my family needed it next. She said it because my clarity about money was inconvenient to a system that had always relied on my compliance and my willingness to smooth things over rather than name them. Staying home was not the humiliation she intended. Staying home meant I wasn't there when the venue flagged the account. I wasn't there when vendors started calling. I wasn't managing anyone's crisis or absorbing anyone's panic, or writing emergency checks to patch what the dispute had disrupted. I was at my kitchen table in Charlotte, finishing dinner, with my phone on the counter and no one able to reach me who didn't genuinely mean well. That was not a loss. That was the first time in years I had not been drafted into maintaining a system designed to keep me useful, keep me quiet, and call both of those things love. The charge was reversed. The record was accurate. The people who had treated my account as a resource they were entitled to were no longer in a position to do so. I did not destroy my family by reporting what happened. I stopped allowing them to treat the cost of their choices as something I was supposed to absorb in silence. And then finally, clearly, with documentation, I stopped.